The silence before the storm. The forest held its breath. Ethan Cole sat at his desk, the only sound the scratch of his pen and the slow rhythm of rain sliding down the cabin window. The storm outside was steady but unthreatening, like a heartbeat the world had forgotten. He preferred it that way. Silence, rain, and the faint hum of the fire were the last things that still made sense to him. For 2 years, this cabin had been his confession booth. He had built it himself, plank by plank, after walking away from the city, from his career, and from Lydia. Every nail he drove into the wood had been a prayer for peace, every wall a barrier against memory. But solitude was not the blessing he'd imagined. It was a mirror, and it never stopped reflecting. He closed his notebook and leaned back, staring at the dim glow of the fire. The unfinished sentence on the page stared back. Love, when it finally dies, still leaves its ghost behind. Outside, thunder grumbled low, rolling across the mountains like distant regret. Ethan rose and moved to secure the shutters, the floor creaking beneath his bare feet. Beyond the rain-blurred glass, the forest swayed, 1,000 black silhouettes bowing under the storm's invisible hand. He had grown used to its company. The trees never asked questions. Then came the sound that didn't belong. A car engine, faint but unmistakable, groaning up the gravel path that hadn't been used in months. Ethan frowned. No one came this far, not by accident. He stepped to the window, heart tightening. Through the downpour, headlights flickered between the trees, then vanished. Moments later, a knock, sharp, frantic, cut through the storm. He froze. For a long moment, the cabin returned to silence, except for the rain drumming against the roof. Then another knock came, louder, desperate. He opened the door. A woman stood there, drenched and trembling. Her wedding dress clung to her body like a second skin, the fabric torn at the hem and smeared with mud. Strands of dark hair stuck to her face. Her mascara had bled into faint shadows beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who had run until there was nowhere left to run. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking with cold. "I just need to get out of the rain." Ethan didn't answer at first. The sight of her, this stranger in white, wild-eyed and shivering, felt almost unreal, like a vision conjured by loneliness. But her breath came in quick, visible clouds, and her lips were turning blue. He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, as if entering meant crossing some invisible line, then slipped past him. The warmth of the fire hit her immediately. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the floorboards as if afraid they might reject her too. Ethan closed the door. "You're soaked. There's a blanket by the fire." "Thank you." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of exhaustion. She moved closer to the hearth, her reflection flickering in the flames. He studied her quietly. She looked young, though her eyes carried something far older, fear or regret, or both. Mud streaked her bare feet. A ring still gleamed faintly on her finger, though it caught the light like a wound. "You're far from town," Ethan said finally. "Car trouble." She gave a hollow laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You could say that." He didn't press. The storm had turned fierce again, battering the windows with sheets of rain. Whatever had driven her here, it wasn't something that could be fixed with a wrench. "Sit," he said, motioning to the armchair across from him. She obeyed, clutching the blanket around her. The silence between them grew thick, filled with questions neither was ready to ask. After a while, he spoke again. "I'm Ethan." "Clara," she said. The name lingered in the air like something fragile. He nodded slowly. "Clara, you look like you've been running." Her eyes lifted to his. For the first time, he saw the storm that wasn't outside, the one she carried with her. "Maybe I have," she said, "and maybe I just stopped." He didn't reply. There was a pain in her tone he recognized too well, a sound he'd heard in his own voice when no one else was listening. Outside, lightning flashed, revealing the outlines of the forest and the car she'd abandoned at the end of his drive. It was barely visible, half swallowed by fog. Clara turned her face toward the fire. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like," she murmured, "to walk away from everything you're supposed to be?" Ethan watched her in silence. "Every day," he said. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, measuring a moment that neither could undo. When the thunder rolled again, it felt like a warning, or perhaps a beginning. The cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become something else entirely, a place where two broken paths had collided. Ethan returned to his desk, pretending to write, though his hand hovered uselessly over the page. Behind him, Clara's breathing slowed as she drifted into uneasy sleep by the fire. He looked at her once more, the runaway bride, the stranger who had found her way into his exile, and whispered to the dark, "What are you running from?" But she didn't answer. The storm did, with another low growl, carrying secrets neither of them were ready to tell. And for the first time in 2 years, Ethan realized that his silence would never be the same again. The confession of a stranger. Morning came slow, gray and wet. Mist rolled off the lake like smoke from some ancient fire. The forest was still dripping from last night's storm, each droplet landing with a sound that broke the fragile quiet. Ethan moved quietly through the cabin, careful not to wake the woman asleep by the fire. Clara lay curled beneath a blanket, her face soft in the dim light. The wedding dress, now dry and crumpled, hung over the back of a chair. It no longer looked like a symbol of love. It looked like a costume she'd outgrown. Ethan brewed coffee, the smell filling the small cabin. He caught himself glancing at her more than once, curiosity mixing with caution. He had grown used to being alone, used to silence answering every word. But this presence shifted the air itself. When she stirred, he spoke gently. "Coffee's ready." Clara blinked awake, disoriented, then sat up, clutching the blanket closer. Her voice was hoarse. "You must think I'm crazy." He shook his head. "No, just wet, tired, and a little lost." A faint smile tugged at her lips, gone as quickly as it came. She rose, accepted the mug, and stood by the window, staring out at the fog-blurred forest. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly, like the world forgot it existed. "That's the point," Ethan replied. She turned to him, studying him in the way only someone running from something can. "Why would anyone want to be forgotten?" He hesitated, then said, "Because remembering hurts more." For a while, they stood in silence. The wind brushed the walls like a whisper. Then, without being asked, Clara began to talk. Her words came slowly at first, as if she feared they might shatter the fragile calm. "I got married yesterday," she said. "At least I was supposed to." Ethan's grip on his cup tightened, but he said nothing. "There were flowers, vows, 1,000 faces staring at me," she continued. "And when it came time to say I do, I couldn't breathe. I looked at him, Michael, and realized I didn't know the man standing beside me." Her voice cracked slightly. "He's kind, in the way men are when they want to be admired. Everything about him is perfect, his smile, his job, the way he shakes hands. But when he looks at me, I feel like a trophy on a shelf. He never wanted me, Ethan. He wanted the picture I completed." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of love, the kind that fed on appearance but starved the soul. "So you ran." "I ran," she said simply. "No plan, no direction. Just away." He studied her in the firelight. "You left everything behind." She nodded, then whispered, "Everything that was already leaving me." The words hung heavy between them. Ethan turned toward the window, rain streaking the glass in thin, silver lines. He could see his reflection, haunted, tired, still wearing the past like a second skin. "I know what it feels like," he said quietly, "to be betrayed by the life you built." Clara glanced at him. "Who betrayed you?" He gave a small, bitter smile. "Someone who said she loved the man I used to be, not the one I became." Lydia's name didn't pass his lips, but her ghost flickered in his mind, the scent of her perfume, the laughter that wasn't meant for him. Clara nodded, as if she understood without needing the details. "So you came here to disappear. And you?" Ethan asked softly, "Where will you go when the rain stops?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I just needed one place where I didn't have to pretend." The clock ticked in the corner. The fire cracked, releasing a shower of orange sparks. Outside, a bird cried out, sharp and lonely. Clara's eyes followed the sound. "It's strange," she said. I feel safer here with a stranger than I ever did at home. Ethan's voice was low. Maybe that says something about what home really is. She turned toward him, her expression softening. Or maybe it says something about what loneliness does to people. He couldn't argue with that. They spent the rest of the morning in quiet conversation. Fragments of stories, careful questions, half-truths exchanged like fragile truce offerings. Neither spoke of tomorrow. The world beyond the cabin felt distant, unreal. When the wind rose again, Ethan went outside to chop wood, needing the rhythm of the axe to drown the thoughts crowding his mind. Through the window, he saw Clara watching him, her hand pressed against the glass, her face unreadable. Inside, when he returned, she had folded her dress neatly and placed it on the chair, the ring beside it on the table. She was standing by the fire again, her hair loose now, her eyes clearer. "I don't know what happens next," she said, "but for the first time, I don't feel afraid of it." Ethan looked at her, wanting to say something that might make sense of the moment, but the words wouldn't come. He only nodded. The rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle, tapping lightly on the roof, like applause for a truth finally spoken aloud. As she turned toward the window again, her reflection caught his. For a fleeting moment, they weren't two strangers anymore, but two survivors, bound not by love, but by recognition. And somewhere between that silence and the rain, Ethan felt the first crack form in the walls he had built around himself. The night of confession. The second night fell quieter than the first. The storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet pine and earth. The forest glistened under the faint glow of the moon, and the lake lay still, a mirror reflecting everything they tried not to say. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Ethan sat at his desk again, his pen hovering above an empty page. Across the room, Clara sat in the armchair, knees drawn close, watching the flames dance. Neither spoke. The silence between them was not awkward. It was charged, like air before thunder. She broke it first. "You never told me what you write about." Ethan looked up. "Mostly things I can't say out loud." "Like what?" He hesitated, then replied, "Loss. Regret. The ways people pretend to be whole." Clara's gaze dropped to the notebook lying open beside him. "May I?" He nodded. She rose, crossed the room, and picked it up. The pages were filled with tight, deliberate handwriting, thoughts that felt too honest for daylight. She read in silence for a long time before speaking again. "You write about love," she said softly, "like it's a ghost." Ethan leaned back, weary. "It is. You can feel it. Sometimes it even speaks, but it's not alive anymore." Clara set the notebook down gently. "You sound like someone who's still listening for it." The words hit harder than she intended. He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw the grief behind his calm. "Once," he said, "I thought love could fix people. Turns out, sometimes love is the thing that breaks them." She understood more than she wanted to. Her name. He hesitated, then exhaled. "Lydia." The name tasted like ash on his tongue. She was my editor, my anchor, until she found a reason to love someone else. Clara said nothing. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. She reached out, adjusting a log that had collapsed, and sparks fluttered upward like fleeting stars. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said quietly. "I built this place so I wouldn't have to hear her voice in my head anymore. But it turns out solitude doesn't erase ghosts. It just makes them louder." Clara turned her gaze toward the window, where the lake shimmered under the moonlight. Maybe ghosts only linger when they think they're still needed. Ethan's lips curved faintly. "You speak like someone who's lived with her own." "I have," she admitted. "I thought marrying Michael would silence mine. But standing at that altar, I felt every lie I'd told myself echo back. I didn't run because I hated him. I ran because I didn't love him enough to pretend anymore." Her confession lingered between them, raw and heavy. Ethan's pulse quickened, not with judgment, but recognition. "You're brave," he said. "Most people would have stayed." She looked at him sharply. "Brave? I humiliated him. My family. Everyone. I drove off in my wedding dress like some foolish cliché." Ethan's voice softened. "You chose truth over convenience." "That's not foolish." That's survival. Clara stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "And what about you, Ethan? Are you surviving? Or just waiting for the pain to end?" The question lodged deep in his chest. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and moved to the window, watching his reflection flicker in the glass. Maybe both. Behind him, Clara rose and approached quietly. The air shifted, warmer, tighter. He could sense her presence before he felt it. "You built these walls to keep the world out," she murmured, "but all I see are scars holding them up." He turned slightly. She was standing close now, the fire's glow catching in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them breathed. "Clara," he began, but the rest of his words dissolved as she reached up and brushed her fingers against his arm. A hesitant, trembling gesture, like testing the edge of a flame. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice barely audible. "Maybe because you don't ask me to be anyone else." Her touch lingered. His self-control faltered. He wanted to step back, to remind himself that she belonged to another life. But instead, he stepped closer. The silence folded around them. The world outside ceased to exist. When their lips met, it wasn't passion, it was confession. A desperate need to feel something honest after so much pretending. For a fleeting second, it felt like absolution. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. Clara pulled away, her breath uneven, her eyes shining with guilt. "I shouldn't have done that." Ethan's voice was rough. "You're not the only one who shouldn't have." She turned from him, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I thought leaving him would make me free," she whispered. "But maybe all I've done is run from one mistake into another." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that this moment meant something, but the truth was heavier than words. The fire snapped, sending a spark into the darkness. Neither spoke again. Clara walked to the guest room without looking back, and Ethan remained by the fire, staring into the dying embers. When the final flame flickered out, he whispered to the quiet, "Solitude was easier than this." Outside, the lake reflected the thin crescent of the moon, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound both lonely and alive. Ethan didn't move. He knew something had shifted beyond repair. The cabin he built to escape the world had just become the place where everything he feared came to find him. The morning after silence. Dawn arrived pale and cold. The lake was wrapped in mist, its surface smooth as unbroken glass. A thin shaft of sunlight pierced the clouds, settling on the wooden floor where Ethan stood, motionless, his gaze fixed on the empty chair by the fire. Clara was gone. Her absence filled the cabin more completely than her presence ever had. The blanket she'd used lay folded neatly on the armrest, and her wedding ring rested on the table beside an empty coffee mug. Next to it, a small folded note. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. The paper was still warm from the fire, edges curled from the night's heat. "You gave me one honest night," the note began, the handwriting soft, deliberate. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be that honest again. Don't look for me. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses." He read it twice, maybe 3 times, until the words stopped feeling like ink and started feeling like loss. The fire had died sometime before dawn. Only gray ash remained. Ethan knelt beside it, feeding in a few sticks, watching new flame rise slowly from the cold. It caught the edges of her note for a moment, turning the last of her handwriting into a curl of smoke that disappeared through the chimney. He wasn't sure how long he stayed there. The forest outside came alive again. The sound of dripping branches, birds announcing the morning, the creak of thawing ice along the lake. Everything was moving forward, as though nothing had happened at all. But everything had. When Clara had kissed him, something inside him had shifted. A wall cracked, a truth resurfaced. He had spent years convincing himself that isolation was peace, that love was too fragile to survive honesty. But now, her sudden absence revealed the lie behind that comfort. He walked to the door and stepped outside. The ground was wet, soft with mud. A single set of footprints led away from the cabin toward the road that vanished into the pines. She hadn't taken the car. That much he could see. She'd left it behind, along with the version of herself that had arrived here in a torn dress and shaking hands. For a moment, he wanted to follow those footprints, to call her name and ask for a reason, any reason, to believe that what had happened between them meant more than escape. But he didn't. He simply stood there, watching the morning swallow her trail, and whispered her name once under his breath. Clara. The word dissolved into the fog, unanswered. He went back inside and sat at his desk. The notebook lay open where he'd left it, blank page waiting. He stared at it for a long time, then finally began to write. Not about Lydia, not about betrayal, about her, about the woman who had run into a storm wearing white and found herself reflected in his solitude. About how two broken souls could collide for a moment and leave behind something that wasn't love, but wasn't nothing either. Hours passed unnoticed. The light changed from gold to gray, then back to gold again. By the time he stopped writing, the notebook was nearly full. He read the last line aloud, quietly, as if testing its truth. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what staying means. Outside, a raven called from a branch near the roof. The sound startled him, sharp and lonely, but strangely fitting. He closed the notebook, feeling the weight of both its ending and its beginning. Days later, the manuscript was complete. He bound it in worn leather and signed and addressed it to his publisher under a different name, someone who didn't hide from his past. The title came easily, The Woman Who Ran into the Rain. He placed the ring Clara had left inside a small wooden box beside his desk. For a while, he watched it gleam in the afternoon light, simple and cold. Then he closed the lid and set it back on the shelf. Weeks slipped by. The forest grew green again, the air softer, the lake restless with the promise of spring. Visitors sometimes passed his road now. Hikers, campers, the occasional lost traveler, but none stopped. Ethan didn't expect them to. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the cabin walls in amber, he caught sight of something across the lake. A woman's figure walking along the far shore. Just a silhouette. No details. No confirmation. He didn't move to call out. He only watched until the figure disappeared into the trees, leaving the lake calm once more. Maybe it was her. Maybe not. Some mysteries deserved to remain unconfirmed. As the last of the daylight faded, Ethan returned to his chair by the fire, the same one where she had once sat wrapped in a blanket, trembling and alive. He poured himself a cup of coffee, opened a new notebook, and began again. The first line came easily this time. He built his cabin for silence, but silence never stays where the truth has been spoken. He paused, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not of joy, but of understanding. Outside, the night gathered softly around the cabin, and the wind moved through the trees like the echo of a familiar voice. Ethan listened. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It simply was, and in that quiet, he knew, some storms don't destroy you. They strip you bare, so you can begin again.